Madam Speaker, I am pleased now to recognize the original author of this bill, and because of her deep concern about this matter, I'm going to yield her as much time as she may consume.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized for as much time as she can consume.
Good morning, Madam Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for his generosity. Try as they may, the Majority Leader Cantor and the House Republican leadership were unable to move forward with the Stock Act without keeping at least some of the reforms that we included in this bill 6 years ago. However, when it comes to K Street, it appears that Republican leadership couldn't stomach the pressure from the political intelligence community. And after working behind closed doors, the majority removed the major provision that would have held political intelligence operatives to the same standard as lobbyists who come before the Congress. I need to put into the record that the political intelligence is worth $400 million a year. It is unregulated, unseen, and operates in the dark. Fortunately, Democrats and Republicans alike are fighting to keep political intelligence as part of the final bill. Senator Grassley shares my outrage that Mr. Cantor would let the political intelligence community off the hook. Together with a supermajority of Democrats and Republicans in the Senate, Senator Grassley followed my lead and included political intelligence requirement in the Senate version of this bill. I think his statement yesterday tells you all you need to know about his desire to see this language inserted back into the Stock Act before it reaches the President's desk. And I would like to read that into the record, if I may. It is astonishing and extremely disappointing, Senator Grassley said, that the House would fulfill Wall Street's wishes by killing this provision. The Senate clearly voted to try to shed light on an industry that's behind the scenes. If the Senate language is too broad, as opponents said, why not propose a solution instead of scrapping the provision altogether? I hope to see a vehicle for meaningful transparency through a House-Senate conference or other means. If Congress delays action, the political intelligence industry will stay in the shadows just the way Wall Street likes it. At its heart, the Stock Act is a statement of how we in Congress view ourselves and our relationship with those who sent us here. No matter how powerful our position may be, or we believe it is, nor how hallowed the halls that we walk, none of us is above the law. With the passage of the Stock Act, we can move one step closer to living up to the faith and trust bestowed upon us by the American people, the citizens whom we serve. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Back. Gentleman from Texas.
I'll yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Dole, who is also a member of the Financial Services Committee.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I certainly want to thank the chairman for yielding, and thank you for your leadership. I also want to thank my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, Ms. Slaughter, Mr. Walz, for your leadership with regard to the Stock Act. Madam Speaker, the American public believe that Congress has the ability to profit from their position. And while this is illegal today in insider trading laws, I think that we've got an obligation to make it even stronger and even clearer to the American public and to everyone that we here in the United States Congress hold ourselves up to a higher standard. I think this is expected of us as public servants. I am pleased to say that in the Stock Act, in this legislation moving forward, is language from my bill, H.R. 2162, the No Pensions for Felons bill. This language will strengthen and expand the existing law to require that federal lawmakers convicted of a public corruption felony forfeit their taxpayer-funded congressional pension. I know this sounds like common sense, but actually today there are those that are collecting taxpayer-funded pensions that have been convicted of a public corruption charge while serving in public office. This provision adds 21 new public corruption offenses to the current law, including violations for insider trading and others. Additionally, this will prohibit the former members of Congress from receiving a congressional pension if they are convicted of a covered offense that occurred while they are subsequently serving in any other publicly elected office. Sadly, we have seen this before, where former members of this chamber, like one from my state, former Governor Rod Blagojevich, convicted of a felony, corruption charges, and yet at age 62 he'll be eligible for a taxpayer-funded pension. Not only this is wrong, this is an insult to the American taxpayers, and this provision will address such violations of the public trust in the future. I want to thank the chairman for your leadership.
Gentleman's time
and I
has
want to urge
expired.
my colleagues, not just on my side of the aisle, but across the aisle, to support this important legislation. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased now to recognize the distinguished gentleman from Minnesota who joined with the ranking member of the Rules Committee in introducing the original bill, Tim Walz. And I will yield to him as much time as he may consume.
Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for as much
Thank you,
time as
Madam
he may
Speaker, and I
consume.
thank the gentleman from Michigan. I'd also like to thank the chairman for his support of this bill and eloquent response on it. It's been a long 6-year journey to pass this reform. It's taken hard work and a bipartisan effort. The American people expects and deserves that. When I first came to Congress in 2006, after spending a lifetime of teaching social studies in the public school classroom, I was approached by the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Slaughter, and Brian Baird, our former member from Washington State. He said, "You were sent here to make a difference and do things differently. If you really believe in reform, take a look at this bill." I got involved right after that, and Representative Slaughter, I can say, has been a stalwart supporter of this bill. She understood this is far more than just about clarifying insider trading. This is about restoring faith to the institution. She's done this not, ethics it seems to be in vogue right now. It's been in vogue her whole lifetime. She has lived that sermon of ethics and living by the rules instead of just giving it, and that I appreciate. Understanding the integrity of this institution stands above all else. We must, as the sacred holders of the privilege, the honor, and the responsibility given to us by our neighbors to self-govern ourselves, make sure that this institution is never tarnished. And this bill goes a long ways to doing that. The perception is that members of Congress are enriching themselves. That's not only an affront to our neighbors that we're not playing by the rules, it is a cancer that can destroy the democracy. Each member of Congress has a responsibility to hold themselves not just equal to their neighbors, but to a higher standard. The public wants us to come here and debate how we educate our children, how we serve our veterans, how we build our roads, how we protect this nation, how we spend those taxpayer dollars. That's what makes us strong. All these differing ideas to come together for a compromise and move forward. If there is a perception that someone is enriching themselves, it undermines our ability to do those things. So what's happened here, we're not here today to pat ourselves on the back. This might be the only place where doing the right thing gets you kudos. It's expected of everyone else. But we're here to say this is a victory not for us. It is one tiny step on a journey, which is about restoring the faith of the American people in the institution. They can believe with all their heart that we are wrong. They cannot believe that we are corrupt. They will have us, and we will pass, and we will be dust, and this place, this building, this podium right here will still stand. And that's what we're doing here today. So I implore folks, let's come together in a bipartisan manner. And I agree with the gentlelady. I'm disappointed the political intelligence piece isn't in here. But as I said, I believe this is a first step. We can't wait for the perfect to move something forward. So I think it's a good bipartisan compromise. I implore my colleagues, join us on this first step. Give this win to the American public. And then let's get back in here, start working on jobs. Let's get back in here, start working on the national debt. Let's get back in here and figure out how we're going to protect this nation and educate our children into the future. This lets us do that. I think showing the American public we can come together. Let's get it passed. Let's have the President sign it. And let's get on to real business. So with that, I thank the gentleman for the time. Again, I thank the ranking member and members of this, and I would be remiss not to mention a person who was one of the original 7 folks on this bill. Walter Jones has been our Republican colleague, has been a stalwart supporter of this. This is truly a bipartisan piece. Ethics crosses the aisle. Our folks in here are good people coming together for the good of their citizens, and for that I'm grateful for today. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to my Texas colleague, Mr. Canseco, who is a member of the Financial Services Committee.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague, Chairman Smith. Madam Speaker, too often the American people feel that members of Congress live by and benefit personally from a different set of rules than those by which ordinary Americans live. To me, this lack of confidence is unacceptable. It is imperative that we rebuild the trust of the American people in their elected representatives. The Stark Act will help do just that. It explicitly bans members of Congress and congressional staff from using information obtained on the job and using it to profit from securities trading, and gives the Securities and Exchange Commission the ability to investigate and prosecute them just like any other American. The American people expect that those who serve in government to do so with integrity. The Stark Act will help ensure that those in government meet this expectation. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to recognize Bobby Scott, the chairman of the ranking member of the subcommittee to which this measure would have gone had we been able to hold hearings. I yield to him as much time as he may consume.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, the bill we're considering today, the Stark Act, would prohibit members of Congress and other legislative branch employees, as well as executive and judicial branch employees, from using non-public information derived from an individual's position or gained from the performance of an individual's duties for personal benefit. Today we're amending the Senate-passed bill S-2038 with a substitute that makes some changes to the Senate text, such as regrettably eliminating the requirement that certain political intelligence activities be disclosed under the Lobbying Disclosure Act. These intelligence firms obtained inside information from members of Congress, their staff, and then they sell that information to investment firms, and the public should be informed of these types of contacts. But with this bill, our goal is to hold members of Congress as well as other government officials to the same standard as those in corporations who have the duty not to trade on information that is not available to the general public. And most members of Congress believe that this type of activity was wrong, whether explicitly prohibited by criminal law or at least subject to the Ethics Committee sanctions. And most of us assume that a Food and Drug Administration official could not call his stockbroker shortly before a blockbuster drug is approved and profit off of that insider knowledge. We just assumed that was wrong. But this bill codifies what most of us thought was already the law. Now, this is not a complicated issue. This is the same standard that applies to those in the corporate context. It is wrong to trade on non-public information for our benefit and to the detriment of the public. The public has the right to expect that public interest comes first, and that people should not have to worry about what may be motivating our actions as we make decisions that impact them. I want to acknowledge the work of my colleagues, the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Slaughter, and the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Waltz, for their leadership in drafting and introducing the House version of the Stark Act. This legislation represents an appropriate acknowledgement of what most of us thought was already the law, that the national government officials of all branches should not benefit financially from non-public information they learn by virtue of their positions, and so I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of the legislation. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, I'll yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Duffy, who is a member of the Financial Services Committee.
Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 2 minutes.
I appreciate the gentleman for yielding. I think we're all aware that this issue came out when Peter Schweitzer wrote a book called Throw 'Em All Out. After that, 60 Minutes did a special story about how members of Congress were benefiting by using whether it was insider information or information that the rest of the public wasn't privy to. And I think that story and the succeeding several months has created a deficit of trust between members of Congress and the American constituents. What I did is I introduced a version that would deal with this issue, I think, very simply. I thought what we should do is mandate that members put their assets into a blind trust so there is a bright line between information that they have as members and their trading portfolio. And if they chose not to do that, they would have to aggressively disclose every trade within 3 days. Now, my bill is not on the floor today. But the version that we have here today, I think, is much improved from the original version that came out. We have an improved reporting requirement that goes from 90 days, not to 3, but it goes to 30 days, which is much improved from the original legislation. We've included the executive branch, which I think is imperative, and we have language that uses the blind trust as a potential opt-out if you're not actually managing your funds. Now, as we gather around and vote on this bill, we debate this bill, I think it's important to note that this is the first step, a step in the right direction. But as we come together and reevaluate what we've done here, I think there's many more steps to take to assure that members of Congress don't profit from the information they come across as a member of this institution. With that, I'd yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased now to recognize a member of the Judiciary Committee that's worked on this matter, even though we couldn't hold hearings. The gentleman from Tennessee, Steve Cohen, and I recognize him for 2 minutes.
Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a very important bill, and I appreciate the efforts put in it by Ms. Slaughter and Mr. Waltz, who have championed this for many, many, many years. And I appreciate the Republicans for coming in with a bipartisan effort. The bill has indeed been improved by the Senate, and it was improved through the honest services statute that was added to it, which our committee debated and passed, I believe, in a goodly fashion. I don't know if it was unanimous or not. But that was one of the most important aspects, in my opinion, of this bill. There are public officials throughout this country who have abused their position of trust, and that has hurt all of government by using their position for personal gain. The honest services statute used to be a vehicle by which U.S. attorneys could go after them. The Supreme Court ruled that there was a defect in that law. It has been corrected in this bill. It means we've got more effective ways to clean up folks who are using public service for their own benefit and restore public trust in public officials from the courthouse to Congress. Further, it makes clear that nobody can be using their inside information here to be making money in the stock market and other places, all of which destroys the public trust which we hold. This Congress is so much better than the ratings the public gives it. Some of it's because of a few bad apples, and some of it's because of misunderstanding of what we do. This bill will go a long way toward cleaning up Congress and local officials and the appearance of impropriety, which is as important as impropriety. We need to be like Caesar's wife, beyond reproach, and this bill will do a lot towards it. I take my hat off again to Ms. Slaughter, the champion of this bill, and Mr. Waltz, who've done so much, and I'm proud to be one of the original 9. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Virginia, the Majority Leader, Mr. Cantor.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the chairman, the gentleman from Texas. Madam Speaker, our government was founded on a promise. This promise was built on a trust between the people and its elected officials. We all have a duty to honor the trust of the American people and to work faithfully on their behalf. Madam Speaker, it is unacceptable for anyone, any elected official or their staff, to profit from information that is not available to the public. People in this country have a right to know and trust that officials at all levels of government are living under the same rules they are. If there is even the slightest appearance of impropriety, we ought to go ahead and prevent that from taking place. It is incumbent upon each of us to start restoring the trust between the people and their elected representatives. That's what the Stock Act is all about. Madam Speaker, members from both sides of the aisle have worked hard on this issue. I'd especially like to express my appreciation to Representatives Tim Waltz and Louise Slaughter for their years of work on this effort. Congressman Waltz has been a leader on the Stock Act since he took office at the start of the 110th Congress, and I particularly want to recognize his willingness to reach across the aisle and keep the lines of communications open as we work to make clear that elected officials abide by the same rules as the American people. This bill we are bringing to the floor today puts in place measures that both strengthen and expand the Senate's work on the Stock Act, as well as remove provisions that would have made the bill unworkable or raised far more questions than they would have answered. We expanded the bill to ensure that executive branch officials and their employees are subject to the same reporting and disclosure requirements as those in Congress. We must all live under the same rules. We also included a provision championed by Representative Robert Dole to ensure that members of Congress who are convicted of a crime do not receive a taxpayer-funded pension after the fact. And finally, Madam Speaker, we added a provision to prohibit members of Congress, executive branch officials, and their staffs from receiving special access to initial public offerings due to their positions. Madam Speaker, we intend to act quickly to send the President a strengthened, workable bill that delivers on our promise to uphold the trust of the American people. And I urge all my colleagues to support the Stock Act, and I yield back.